America's founders are calling. It's your opportunity to respond. This is the Liberty Brief Podcast with your host, Robert Melso, featuring Dr. Thomas Giordano. Hello, everyone. This is Episode 1, The Big Bang, the Cosmos, and Natural Law. I'm your host, Robert Melso. The Liberty Brief Podcast is dedicated to understanding our rights as American citizens and what was meant to be our inheritance by the founding generation of our country. They were inspired by many factors, including the Judeo-Christian biblical traditions, the classical Romans, Greek philosophers, Anglo-Saxon tenets, the British systems of common law, so on. The great minds of the Scottish Enlightenment and the ideas of the Iroquois Confederacy. To name a few, it's our goal to give meaning and significance to their understanding in a way that will inspire our listeners to seek a rebirth of sorts of these formative concepts and to counter any misinformation which is circulating today as to the Founding Fathers' intentions. The first few episodes will be instructional, and as with all bodies of knowledge, the basics are the foundation for further understanding and interpretation of current events which affect our liberties. So we're going to start at the beginning. Our featured guest will be Dr. Thomas V. Giordano, who has written a book called Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters. That word is pronounced unalienable, and that was the pronunciation as known by the Founding Fathers. You'd have known that if you bought the book, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I want to thank Dr. Tom for being here today. Dr. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I suppose we should start at the very beginning. And since we are talking about the Big Bang, I guess it doesn't go much further back than that. Maybe it does. But what is the theory of the Big Bang, and why should our search for understanding of our rights begin there?
Well, the Big Bang is the beginning, really. It's the beginning. The Big Bang is how astronomers describe the way the universe came into being about 13.5 billion years ago. And it's the idea that the universe began as a single point. That is, all of the energy, all of the mass was in a single point that expanded and stretched and grew as large as it is today, right now. And it's still in the process of expanding. The idea was proposed by a Belgian Roman Catholic priest in 1927 named Monsignor Georges Lemaitre. So basically, it's the scientific description of the event, but the causal factors to science still remain unknown. Basically, because anything that comes before the physical universe, before the existence of the physical universe, is really outside of scientific observation and measurement. Now this is where science and mysticism or religion basically diverge. Because science does not have an answer for the cause of the Big Bang, whereas mysticism, religions, a belief in God, those kinds of things, they postulate that there was an intelligent designer behind the creation of the universe because of what came afterwards.
So you mentioned the creator. There's a lot of angst today about creationism, intelligent design versus Darwinism. Do we necessarily have to believe in God to understand this?
No, not at all. Not at all. You see, if you were to look at scientific dogma, and compare it to religious faith or mystical faith, they really are the same thing. Basically, if you have a dogma or if you have a faith, they are both impediments to investigation. I mean, it's one thing to sit there and say, hey, this is the dogma, this is what we'll stay with, and in a very conservative manner, not accept anything outside of the box. And it basically it's comparable to faith in the religious concept, where you say, well, God created it, and that's all I need to know. Either one is good. Either one is acceptable. We'll never know. We'll never have the proper tools to measure or to observe what happened before the creation of the universe or before the Big Bang. As far as science goes, science will throw stones at religious belief, saying, well, it's based on faith. But if you truly think about it, and I'm a scientist myself, I'm not, I'm well versed in the sciences, and I was educated as a scientist. So basically, if you were to look at science itself, science draws its conclusions on our five senses. The five senses that we recognize: sight, smell, touch. These are very unreliable methods of gaining information. And then it's interpretive. We use our brain to interpret what sensations are coming in. So basically, anything that we believe in a scientific realm is basically based upon an illusion, if you really think about it. And it's just as valid an illusion as someone who says, well, I believe that there was an intelligent designer behind the universe. In any case, it really does not matter what the motivation was for the first event. Now, people look at the Big Bang and say it was the first cause. No, the Big Bang was caused by something. Science has postulated that it was a vibrational frequency that started to vibrate everything inside this small point, and it expanded. In any case, what we do have is an infrastructure in the universe that has order set to it. We've got order set from chaos, and these are the laws of nature that are actually the underpinnings of that order. And we must not ever forget that it was the church that gave order to the universe as far as our Western civilization goes. It was a belief in an ordered universe that allowed scientific investigation.
So if I'm hearing you right, everywhere we look around, everywhere, except perhaps in Congress, there are signs of intelligence.
Yeah.
Is that
yes,
what you're saying?
Yes, it would seem to be that government is the only place where there's a paucity of intelligence. Okay. Right. Well, when we're talking about intelligence, look, I've been a ham radio operator for a long time, and we refer to any information over a transmitted frequency that you can interpret as intelligence. Intelligence is something that is being transmitted from the beginning of the universe. Intelligence comes in many, many different forms. But yes, intelligence is basically, the old definition for intelligence was a spiritual being. So, you have to understand that something is going on a much higher level than we're able to perceive.
Can I interrupt you there? Because
sure.
I see a lot of pushback on the theory of intelligent design.
Right.
And it seems to me that 100 years ago, there wasn't so much conflict between religion and science. And now proponents of intelligent design come forward and say, wait a minute, there are a lot of clues here that point to a creator. Mm-hmm. And
yes.
Why do you suppose there's such vehement opposition to even talking about this in schools and in the public forum?
This false contrast between what they would say is religion and science, it really is a false argument. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but it all started with Marxism. Marxism basically was trying to apply a scientific approach to ordering societies. Now, you have to understand that religion seeks to find the answers to certain questions that precede the creation of the universe, whereas science stops at the wall at creation. Science is only interested in the physical universe. It cannot postulate as to what caused it, number one. Number two, as far as people saying that they contrast one another, not at all. Not at all. It was the Roman Catholic Church, as I said, that gave order to the universe. You know, there was an investigation into the most important 300 scientific minds over the last 2,700 years, and 20% of them were Roman Catholic priests. So let's look at the Big Bang Theory, for example. The Big Bang Theory was ideated by a Roman Catholic priest, a Belgian Roman Catholic priest, Father Lemaitre. Well, he was a father then, but he was a Monsignor when he passed away. But the fact of the matter is that the scientific community had to be convinced that his proofs, his mathematical proofs, were correct. The science, let's take the geology, for example. Geology is known as the Jesuits' science because it was the Jesuits who developed the science of geology. Many of the astronomical findings on the moon, for example, they're all named after Jesuits who named them, or Roman Catholics. I mean, even when you talk about, let's say, Galileo, because this Galileo Galilei is the first one that they throw at you and say, well, you see, the church is against science. No, not at all. You know, what they fail to say is that the ideator of the heliocentric theory of our solar system was it was ideated by Copernicus. Copernicus was his brother was the Archbishop of Warsaw. He had a degree in canonic law. He was a canonic lawyer, aside from being a physicist. So, you know, the thing is that you have to understand that there is a bias against all religion when you're talking about leftist ideologies, because they have to necessarily take away what many people in the world believe was given to them by God or by their creator. But even if you don't want to believe in God, the process that we are a product of is what gives us our humanity. And we'll get into this in a little bit, because people say, all right, my natural rights, the Big Bang, how do they have what do they have to do with one another? But there is a link, and the transmission of that intelligence is key to understanding that link.
All right, we're going to get to that. But I would point out to you, in a sense, I'm not going to disagree with you, but I would point out that many of the greatest philosophers and scientists over the years have held religion in high esteem. They've been religious themselves.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
To say that science contradicts religion is a bit of a stretch, I think.
No, it doesn't contradict it at all. Not at all. They're two different realms of observation. They're both seeking the truth, but they're seeking the truth using different methodologies. Science is using the machinery, the tools, along with the five senses and the human intellect to interpret what they're seeing in the physical universe. But they're saying nothing about God or the creation. They're only observing the physical universe through physical means, whereas mystics, especially the Hindu or the yogic sciences, or those people are investigating the universe using other tools, using their own, let's say, expansion of their own identity to discover what they believe is truth of the universe itself that goes beyond the physical universe. So they're not in contrast with one another. The only thing is that, science is a great thing because it gives us technology. And as long as you could talk on an iPhone, well, that iPhone has more solidity to you than a God sparking the creation of the universe 13.5 billion years ago. It's just the way it is. We have a very limited view, and most people don't even bother to think about it. They're here, they're doing what they have to do to survive. They're given the tools to survive. Now, you were speaking earlier about Darwinism. Well, Darwinism is basically a little tiny aspect of science. And Darwin, there's a great flaw in Darwinism, a great flaw. And I, as my undergraduate was in zoology. I'm well aware of the theory of evolution, Darwin's theory, which replaced the Lamarckian theory. But the Darwin's theory has a couple of very, very serious flaws, and no one can answer them. One is a question of what's called backward causation. In other words, if you're saying that I am the product of all of the life forms that came before me, and I have this genetic structure, if they're talking about adaptability to a niche, what gave me the genes to adapt to a stressor in the environment in the future?
Right. You're saying, in effect, that there had to have been a plan. You don't just start out with random mutations and get to some of the complex life forms.
There's that. And then by sheer happenstance, if you were to look at the genetics, of our genetic makeup, approximately 350,000 years ago, there seems to have been a lateral injection of DNA into our genetic structure that does not appear in any of the precursor life forms. And they keep looking for a missing link. Well, if it was as structured as it was, and we had, let's say species A goes to species B, in a series of long-term evolutionary mutations that are favorable to a specific niche and survival, well, there seems to be a whole slew of passes that were jumped over. Now, I really don't want to get into the evolutionary theory or the biology behind it or any of that. But let's just say that science has a flaw, and that is that flaw is dependent upon our senses. And our senses are not reliable. I mean, we could come to things very, very accurate. And I'm not saying anything against science. I'm a scientist myself. I'm not saying anything against it. Science has given us, the best, where we are right presently in our existence as a species. This is the best time to be alive. We have the most things around us for our comfort and our survival. But, it doesn't end just there. Science has given us a lot of technology. Most people today aren't even interested in science. The underlying purpose of science is knowledge. If you were to go to right now and look for funding because you want to know something, no one will fund you. No one will give you money because there's nothing that could be produced out of that. There's no technology that could come out of it where it would not be worth their while to invest in, because there's no return on the investment of knowledge, simple knowledge, because the knowledge could be useful or not useful. But the fact is, if it doesn't produce a product, then you can't create an industry to produce a technology that people would want to buy. So it's not the science. People are looking at technology and confusing it for science. It's not the same thing.
All right. We could go off on a big tangent there, but
oh yeah,
I want to bring
really.
us back. The podcast today is about the Big Bang and natural law. Now,
right.
I would venture to guess that very few people associate the meaning of natural law with the Big Bang. They aren't often juxtaposed, and yet you're trying to make a connection here. Just what is natural law and what's the connection?
All right. Well, where most people are confused, Rob, is that they confuse natural law with the laws of nature. Okay? They sound alike. And oftentimes when they say natural law, people automatically assume you're talking about the mechanics of the physical universe. That's not what natural law is about. The laws of nature are involved in the ordered structure of the framework of the physical universe. They're the underpinnings which create order from chaos in the cosmos. These are the things we study in mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, and other such hard sciences. Science only deals with the seeking of the truth of the physical universe. Okay, let's just end it right there. So it's studying formula like force equals mass times acceleration, or energy equals mass times a constant squared, or all of the laws that you learned in chemistry, Boyle's law, Charles' law, all of these laws, Archimedes' principles in mathematics, those kinds of things. Natural law has a more mystical or religious origin. And it really is understood through intellectual observation and assumptions in the belief in an intelligent creator. Now, if you were a religious person, you would say that it was God. God created the universe, and He prescribed for all men, all of our species, not just men. All right, all of our species, not by a formal declaration, but by an internal, let's say, dictate of reason alone. When He gave us the capability of reason and an intellect and free will, it sets in motion a proper consideration of how we are to treat each other as a species and how we are to serve that which, or give reverence to that which created us. So natural law is an extension of basically the agreeableness or disagreeableness of human action as they apply to the nature of man. All right, and it goes into a lot of different things too. It goes into the duties and responsibilities that we owe to the Creator, to ourselves, to our neighbors. It covers things like self-defense, temperance, the fact that we should honor our parents, have a sense of benevolence to everyone, to all, and how we should abide by our agreements and contracts and things like that. So there are basically there are primitive laws of nature, which we can get into. Natural laws is something that was ideated by man because of a belief in the creation and in the animated creature that came out of this process of life that we are experiencing in this universe.
You're sort of hearkening back to St. Thomas Aquinas, aren't you?
Oh, yes, of course. Of course. Because St. Thomas Aquinas, he was a true student of Aristotle, and the Aristotelian thought, it was actually St. Thomas who introduced it into the canons of the Roman Catholic Church. And the church spread, actually, if you really want to look at it closely, is basically spreading an Aristotelian philosophy. Yes, he wanted to prove the existence of the Creator without using faith. In other words, he said, okay, you're going to throw stones at my faith. I'll prove to you by logic, by reason alone, that there was a Creator. And he did it using his 5 pillars of creation. So basically, even St. Thomas Aquinas showed the world that you didn't need necessarily to believe in God to understand that you're living in a natural process that came from the intelligence of someone or something.
You were going to talk about the primitive laws of nature, and they can be reduced to a series of maxims. There's 6 or 7
right.
of them. Can you tell us what they are?
Well, the first one is reason. Some would call this a comparative sagacity. Reason. Just the ability to use logic in your observations. You know, what you're taking in, you have to remember that all of your intelligence is basically the product of your 5 senses. What your memories are because of those 5 senses. Your senses are pulling in that information, and it's creating a memory. And reason is a comparative wisdom in looking at your memories and applying it to your survival. Okay. The second one would be self-love. You have to understand that you are life. You're a piece of life. You are a piece of the living universe. And it is such a great gift that you have to not only explore the life that's around you, but you have to try to understand yourself and realize that you are the most fortunate thing in the universe because you are the universe encapsulated. It's self-love. So basically, this is what leads Christians to believe that God was a God of love, as opposed to the Old Testament, which said he was a vengeful God. It was an act, you could say it was an act of love that God gave you the awareness to observe that you are a living thing and you are part of every other life that's in the universe. All right. This is also has to do with your experiencing life. Basically, that's the best way to say it. The third is basically a survival mechanism, which is the attraction of the sexes to each other. Of course, in biology, we would recognize this as a purely pheromonal or hormonal response, but there are mechanisms within your body that attract you so that you can propagate the species. You're translating intelligence or code through physical bodies, or over time through physical bodies. And we need the physical bodies to perpetuate the species. So there's a sexual attraction. The fourth, they would view as the tenderness of or care that parents would give to their children. Basically, we know that when children are born, they're the most vulnerable. They're completely incapable of survival without the tenderness of maternal care and the protections of paternal care. So that would be the fourth primitive law of nature. You're obligated to care for your children. Then there is obviously religious sentiment, because these laws came from a respect for the tenets, or let's say the mechanisms or the organizations that we set up to give thanks to our Creator for having given us life, given us the ability to perceive that life. Let's say the awareness of being aware. And then the sixth is basically sociability, which is basically your ability to live among your fellow creatures. So those are the sixth. Now, the sixth is important, and we can get into that. But basically, this is how we begin to understand the morality of good versus the morality of evil. Okay? There is a moral good and a moral evil, but you only will understand this when people organize themselves into societies.
Okay. So I guess we're getting to the part where it becomes interesting to the political side of this discussion. And there are some people who use relativism, I guess that's the word for it, to say that all societies are equal, all customs are equal, countries are basically equal, and that there's no real definable moral good or moral wrong. I think that's way off the rails, but I think you need to describe that for us and tell us why.
Yes, it is way off the rails. When we're describing what we know about man is that we know that he's not only intelligent, but in the state of nature, he's free. He's also responsible for his actions. Now, remember that what many people in the West have misunderstood the Hindu term karma, right? They say good karma, bad karma, this kind of thing. And if you do bad, you're going to have bad come back to you. If you do good, it's going to come back to you. They're getting it wrong. That's not what karma is. Karma is basically action or doing something. The overwhelming majority of what you are accumulating as an individual is outside of your control. It's things around you. So when you talk about moral relativism, well, you can say that from, in one society, what is moral in one society is immoral in another. But these are social accords, basically. We're talking about absolute morality. Across the board, every society would look at murder, for example, as being immoral. especially if it's not, there's a difference between killing and murder. Murder has criminal intent behind it for some gain or because of, some irrational reaction. There is a moral good and a moral evil. Okay. Moral good would be helping your fellow man. Doesn't matter what society you're in. If you aid in the survival of someone else without being asked, all right, that's a moral good. And that goes across the board. It's found in every society. So basically, I'm not a fan of moral relativism or social or cultural relativism. Robert, you have to understand that one of the things that our founding fathers understood is that when they looked at these natural laws, they were looking at an expanded identity of humankind, an expanded identity. Now, this is very, very important because the more concentrated your identity becomes, the more you will use your intellect to protect. So if you identify yourself as an American, well, anything that threatens America, you're willing to give your life for. Right? If you identify yourself as a Phillies fan, anything that threatens your idea of the Philadelphia Phillies, you're going to react to in a negative manner towards people outside. You see, your identity, human identity, is the greatest cause of the greatest suffering on this planet. If we are able to expand that, then this concept of, cultural good, it all disappears. It all disappears. Because if you're willing to die for your country, your religion, your sexuality, your football team, if you're willing to die for it, you're also willing to kill for it. These things are not as relative as people believe, as much as they are concentrated in identity. And the founding fathers, when they spoke of self-evident truths and things like that, and following natural law, they were applying that to the species, mankind, Homo sapiens.
So let's back up a little bit. You said that man from birth is wholly, they're unable to provide for his own self-care. So mothers and fathers are there
Right.
to help them and get them to a point where they can survive on their own.
Right.
That's a law of nature.
Yes, that was considered one of the 6 basic fundamental primary laws of nature. Yes.
And the religious sentiment you described leads us, I gather, naturally toward a supreme being. And
I would say yes, because the religious organizations are there to give reverence to that which created us. It's in every culture. I mean, if you were to look at the how many gods and goddesses do the Hindus have, for example, they've got somewhere like 6 million. So it basically what you it's a reverence for the intelligence that created the universe and created you as a byproduct of that universe. So whether you want to call it God or give it a name, Yahweh or Allah or whatever, Zeus, Deus, whatever name you want to give them, basically it is a reverence for that which created you and created the environment where you live or where you're surviving.
okay, and then the 6th law that you spoke about was the social construct, the idea
Right.
that we need to live in societies. And
Yes.
can you talk about our duties, our rights as they apply to that?
Yes. Well, you see, if we were living in a state of nature, it would be useless to talk about morality. Because in the state of nature, our primary objective would be survival. When you group for your survival into collections of people, whether they be a family unit, a band, a clan, a tribe, a nation, whatever, you are basically trying to enhance your survival and the survival of the group itself. Okay? So our intention when we're living in a society is to produce good actions. Good actions will produce happiness. Okay. On on the other side of the coin, bad actions produce unhappiness. And basically the pursuit of happiness is basically what gives us a sense of morality and a sense of, let's say, an enlightened self-interest in aiding others. If you were to study, let's say, Adam Smith and his invisible hand in the precepts of economics, free market economics, that's what you're looking at. Your actions will have a ripple effect throughout society. So when you talk about good, moral good and moral evil, you're talking about the effects that it would have on that society. Okay. Now we're impelled by our very nature to assure our own preservation, to defend our life and our body from injuries. So in essence, we're trying to avoid what's hurtful and to provide the things that are required for our existence. Hence, it's basically we have a duty to watch over our own preservation, but also the preservation of the human race. So it is our duty and the principles of our duty to protect one another. And I'm not just talking about a nationality or a race or a creed or a skin color or something. I'm talking about humanity. It's our goal. It should be our goal to protect life in and of itself. And the highest, let's say, the highest example of evolved life on this planet is Homo sapiens. So, you do reverence to God if you protect your neighbor.
All right. I get that. But not all of us have good intent. And history is replete with murderous thugs, Stalin, Hitler, Mao.
Yes, of course.
People that have gone against the noble precepts you're espousing here. What makes it go haywire if we're all trying to advance the cause in society of our mutual benefit? Why is there such evil in the world?
Well, that's a good question. But you have to remember that the people that you mentioned were all leftists. They were people who they were diametrically opposed to believing in the precepts of the creation by a God, natural rights, and the expression of natural rights, is that we even had natural rights. They viewed man from the point of view of their intellect, and their intellect was a sword for their identity. Okay, if they don't identify you as a human being, then it means nothing to them to take your life. No, it is their sense of identity, identifying as a National Socialist, or identifying as a communist, or identifying as a Marxist, that sets up the principles of opposing a 7,000-year history of Western civilization. We've come a long way in the recognition of individuality and the recognition of individual rights as an expression of rights of our species, which actually predate our birth. They precede our birth. They precede our conceptions. Our conception as people.
Okay. Here's my larger point. Even before those tyrants, before Stalin, Mao, Hitler, or whoever else, through
Lenin.
Recorded history, the state of man's existence has been, I would say, fairly despicable most of the time.
Towards
slavery, torture,
right.
Serfdom, criminality, not recognizing
right.
people
and if you
citizens. And, it's been fraught with disturbing abuse of one another. So where has our humanity been all this time?
Oh, it's always been there. But these people only applied it to their group, to which they identified.
Would you say then, based on our history, that it's a natural tendency for men to want to subjugate each other, to control them, to...
It is a natural tendency for man to survive. And if he views that survival as dependent upon dominating another group, he'll do it. You have to realize that what we're looking at is identity. Attila the Hun didn't look at the people in Eastern Europe as being the same people as his. So he was able to go in and slaughter them en masse. When the Ottoman Empire was invading, or let's say the Turks were invading the Balkans, you had guys like Vlad Tepes, who we call Dracula, the prototype for Dracula. Vlad Tepes impaled thousands, tens of thousands of Turks because he didn't view them as human. When you had the Crusades, the same thing. When they started out the Crusades, they were not looking at Muslims as being humans. You tell a Roman Catholic, one of the commandments says, thou shalt not kill. Well, you had to convince them that Muslims were not human in order to kill them. And vice versa. If you're not a Muslim, you can kill them. It's not a sin. You see, the thing is that if your survival is dependent upon your identity. But if we were to expand that identity, to over the entire planet and recognize that we're all members of the same species, those identities fall apart, and the reasons for control of other groups will disappear.
Dr. Tom, we're talking about societies, but let's back up. Societies are needed for human beings to function in the world. But let's define life here. We have to get back to that. Can you define life? Give me your sense for what life really means, because we are talking about the Big Bang, the cosmos, natural law, but it all applies to life.
Right.
Very simply for us, for the audience, so that we understand exactly what we're talking about.
Sure. All right. In general, when we're speaking of life in general, we have to distinguish between two different states of matter. Okay. Now, remember, we're talking about life in the physical universe, what we see as an expression of life, living life forms. There are two different categories of matter, organic and inorganic. Organic is obviously living material. It's material that is characterized by the ability to grow, the capacity to grow, to metabolize, to respond to stimuli, to adapt to its environment, and to reproduce. Inorganic material is basically inert material. And you can differentiate the two simply by using a flame. When you use a flame, you put inorganic material to the flame. When you take away the flame, it returns to its natural state. It returns to the state it was before you added the flame. Organic material, on the other hand, is denatured. Now, we're looking at the physical manifestation of life there. And there is a difference now. These are the physical manifestations of life. They are the animated transmitters of code or intelligence into the future using physical bodies. And the interesting thing is that the template, in the strictest sense, the template for these life forms, from simple to complex, is the same template. It's replication using DNA, right? They all share this common trait in the transmission of intelligence or code for their particular species. And all life forms are interconnected on this planet, let's say. They're all interconnected. They're all interwoven into a continuing process to produce life experiences in these organisms. So interestingly enough, when the vitality of a living entity is gone, when you die, let's say, that organic material becomes disorganized, becomes chaotic, and the constituent parts return to the environment from which they came. Okay? Now, when we're talking about life as a universal concept, we're talking about the accumulation of experiences. Let's put it this way. Every cell in your body has the memory from the creation of the universe to today, to the present. It has to, because it all started at the same point. Now, you may not remember your great-great-great-grandfather, but that guy's trying to live through you. And you have his characteristics, even though you've never met him, never seen him.
Well, if I have his characteristics, I feel sorry for him.
Don't feel sorry for him. He should feel sorry for you because you're not able to distinguish. Literally, every cell in your body has a memory of that one great grandfather. So, and all the other grandparents that you had before him, so basically life is a continuing experience of accumulation of knowledge, and it goes across the species.
Okay, Tom, we've got to sort of wrap this all up together in a neat bow here. So let's get back to natural law. What's the evidence that natural law was top of mind for the founders of our country when they began this great quest?
Aside from the myriad of things written on Sir William Blackstone, on John Locke, and things like that, all you have to do to understand this is go to the Declaration of Independence and look at that famous line.
If we look at the famous line in the Declaration of Independence, the part where they say all men are created equal, can you break that down for us and define exactly what natural law means in terms of that sentence?
Absolutely. It's proof positive of their intentions. Okay, now listen closely. We hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, we don't need any scientific proof that what we are about to say is true. We know it's true. Okay? Through the experience of man, through our history, we know it's true. That all men are created equal. Now, this particular point of the line is one that gets a lot of stones thrown at it. Why? What are you talking about? What about women? What about that? But hey, how about but you owed slaves. That's not what they're saying here. That all men are created equal. What they're actually saying in today's terminology would be that all humans, all Homo sapiens, are born equally into a natural world. In other words, we're all here because our mothers gave birth to us. Okay?
Would it be fair to say at this point that they meant we have to acknowledge each other's humanity?
Exactly. That's exactly what they're saying. We are all born of women. We are all born to a species, Homo sapiens. When they said all men, that was the 18th century way of saying all mankind. It wasn't sitting there saying all men, all white men, all men of six, they're 6 feet tall. They were saying all humanity. It didn't matter what color you were, what religion you were, where on earth you were born. If you were a member of the species Homo sapiens, you were born just like I was.
And then we get to the part where they say they are endowed.
Right. They are endowed. That means it is an inheritance by their creator, right? Creator, they're referring to God or the intelligent designer. If you don't want to talk about God, these people were God-believing people. Don't let anybody tell you that they didn't believe in God, that they were deists. You tell me what a deist means. It means a person who believes in God. They try to tap dance around this. But the fact of the matter is that socialists will never understand that they can't throw stones at this. They can't throw stones at it because what they're creating as a straw man argument falls flat on its face if you read what they're saying. Now, you got to remember that the words are of the 18th century. But let's continue. All right? They are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, certain in that particular phrase does not mean a limited number. It means without a doubt, for certain, unalienable rights. Unalienable, we'll get to in another podcast. But basically, it means that your rights cannot be transferred or sold without your permission. It doesn't mean they can't be taken away, okay? That among them are life, your ability to live, your ability to live unimpeded, unsuppressed by another living person, okay? Liberty, the expression of your natural, personal, civil, and political rights, and the pursuit of happiness, all right? Now, remember, happiness was an idea that was expressed in the fundamental principles of, the primitive laws of nature. the good actions and the bad actions producing happiness. You see, they're using the words of the definition of natural law. Now, because they said it in that way, all right, they are not excluding other rights, because they are saying among them are. So basically, they're saying that there are many, many more rights that you have, but these are three of them. In the original Declaration, property was also mentioned, but because of the conflict, because of the question of slavery at the time, they took property out. Otherwise, it would read, that among them are life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. So, and property is a very, very important thing. And we'll get to that probably in the next podcast.
Okay. Well, I think we've pretty much exhausted our time here. We've gone over a lot of material, and we've been given quite a bit to think about for now. In the next podcast, we'll be looking at what science and history tell us about man's experience leading up to the founding of our country and what our founders drew upon to form our government. So I want to take the time to thank you, Dr. Tom, and we'll see you on the next podcast. You've been listening to the Liberty Brief, based on the book Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters by Dr. Thomas Giordano. If you want to help spread the word, please subscribe, like, and share using the links below. You can also check out Dr. Giordano's book on Amazon using the links as well.